This week on Perspective, deal or no deal? The Brexit Endgame. On December 11th, British parliamentarians will cast an historic vote on the future of their country. The culmination of nearly 2 years of divisive debate, economic uncertainty, and high-stakes politics.
Our deal is the best deal available for jobs and our economy that allows us to honour the referendum and realise the opportunities of Brexit.
The Prime Minister said, this is the best possible deal, it's the only possible deal. Well, I mean to say, it's not hard to be the best deal if it's the only deal. By definition, therefore, Mr. Speaker, by definition, it's also the worst deal.
And what does Labour have to offer? 6 bullet points. My weekend shopping list is longer than that.
The parliamentary vote next week on a draft agreement already approved by the EU won't put an end to the debate in Britain, nor will it really clarify what lies ahead for the UK, deal or no deal. What is becoming clearer this week, though, in a series of economic studies, is what the economic price might be. And there appears to be a consensus that Brexit will make Britons poorer.
Our job is not to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst.
Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, delivered perhaps the most dire scenario, suggesting that at least in the short term, a disruptive Brexit could plunge the UK into recession. The question then, is the economic price one worth paying for greater British independence from the European Union? Does this deal deliver the political control Britons thought they were voting for in the referendum 2 years ago? And that brings us to the politics. In her efforts to get the Brexit agreement approved by Parliament, British Prime Minister Theresa May is campaigning for political survival. Several cabinet ministers, including 2 Brexit secretaries, have already resigned in protest against the draft withdrawal agreement. There are rumblings from Conservative backbenchers who want to see her gone. On the program this week, a look at the Brexit state of play. And we begin with the politics. Thomas Colson is a politics reporter with Business Insider UK. As you've reported, Prime Minister Theresa May is coming under some pressure to set a resignation date. How would you describe her situation politically now?
I mean, her situation is fraught. It has been somewhat fraught for the last 2 years. These 2 years she spent trying to negotiate Brexit. In some ways, that hasn't changed. In some ways, that has changed. She has this vote going to Parliament on the Brexit deal she spent 2 years negotiating in 2 weeks' time. That is the real crunch point for Theresa May. If she can survive the vote, if she can get her deal through Parliament, her Brexit plan through Parliament, then her situation is consolidated. There is no pressure on her to resign, at least in the short term. But it's looking very unlikely that she'll be able to pass the vote through Parliament. That's when the question of her resignation, the question of her future as Prime Minister becomes a much more pertinent one.
I'm going to say, are the sharks circling already?
Well, it's funny. I mean, we had this sort of when she published her plans for Brexit a couple of weeks ago, the final plans. We knew roughly what they were going to look like, but we had this the sort of right wing of the Conservative Party, the really pro-Brexit wing of the Conservative Party, attempt to launch a coup. Now, these people have been quite canny strategists in lots of ways for the last couple of years, but they attempted to launch this coup. The way it's done is that 48 Conservative MPs need to send, that's 15% of the party, need to send letters of no confidence to trigger a vote in her leadership. Those letters didn't materialise, much to the would-be leaders of this coup, to their confusion. And so, I mean, the sharks are circling, but lots of the sharks have a slightly comic element to them now. But they would be circling in a very serious way if she fails to get through this vote through Parliament. There's a thinking that she's probably going to lose this vote. It's actually a question of how much she's going to lose this vote. If she loses it by more than 100 votes, then there would be serious pressure on her to resign. That is actually might be factoring into her thinking. Just if she can avoid defeat by not too much, that would be maybe enough for her not to have to resign.
How is the opposition faring through all of this? The Labour Party, the others?
The Labour Party, they have this very strange policy on Brexit, which is to not say a huge amount about it unless they really have to. At times of real conservative crisis in terms of this Brexit process, the Labour leadership has been inclined at various points to say very little at all. It's this kind of why interrupt your enemy when they're stabbing themselves in the foot. But I mean, their position on Brexit is. It's kind of ambiguous, and the reason it's ambiguous is because lots of the Labour voters voted to leave the EU in 2016. So if Labour were to come out and have this sort of let's stay in the EU, let's reverse this Brexit process, if they were to come out and say things like that, they'd lose a lot of their vote. And Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, is principally interested in government. He wants to come into government so he can enact these radical socialist reforms. And the way he sees Brexit, he sees it as a potential impediment if he's comes down too hard on one side. So there's the sort of constructive ambiguity has been their position for a long time. It's to oppose the Conservatives' Brexit vision, but not put a radically different one forward. And their position is very much, let's get on with Brexit. It's not been the sort of noble opposition that lots of Remainers hoped for, and it's certainly not something, a vision for Brexit that Leavers could really get on board with either. It's kind of in between.
Because that was my next question. How is the British public viewing this political spectacle now?
Well, I mean, there's a large sense that we need to, from many people, that we need to get on with it. But there's also a sense that this deal that Theresa May has brought back, in many senses, if you speak to lots of people who know what they're talking about, trade experts, policy experts, the people whose job it is to actually scrutinise the details of this deal and look at what the EU's offering, then they would say it's the best deal that we could have negotiated, and they might be right. But it's not a deal for the real pro-Brexit voters. It's not a deal for the Remainer voters. So it's to nobody's satisfaction. And in that sense, I don't think anyone's really happy. I mean, we were warned 2 years ago that there was this danger that we'd probably end up with a Brexit that no one wanted, and that's almost what we've got now. So I mean, there's some antipathy, but there's also a sense that, I mean, increasing sense that this isn't probably not the deal that needs to go through Parliament. Has
the tone or the nature of the debate changed? I mean, I know you're looking at a deal now, but at the same time, I mean, Britons have been having this debate and political discussion for years. Has it changed?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk a lot in Britain about how the last 2 years have divided us. And to some extent, that's true, in the same way that I think that the Trump administration might have been seen to have divided voters in America. But, I mean, the truth of the matter is that Britain has always been divided on this. Britain has been Eurosceptic for as long as we've been members of the European Union. And so in that sense, I think that the Euroscepticism in the UK, the division between those who would see us out of the EU and us remain, that's always been there. But I think the nature of the debate has become somewhat more toxic. I think it's become somewhat more personal in terms of the way politicians interact with each other. And I also think we're increasingly hearing about this prospect of a second referendum. Now that, I think, would do, whatever the virtues of a second vote itself, I think that would possibly do untold damage to the civility of discourse in the UK.
Thomas, thank you very much for your insight into this.
Thank you.